Hello, I believe I am live. Welcome to the first discussion of the first book of my book club, Read a Book with Kara. We will be discussing Their Eyes Were Watching God. And I'm joined by truly two of my absolute favorite people on the planet. They're also both New York Times bestselling authors, and there's just look at all these books. It's just too many bestsellers to even carry. So let's bring them in. We have Miss Janet Mock, writer, director, producer, Valentino cover girl. We have Sam Irby, best-selling author. I truly think the only person keeping me sane with your Judge Mathis newsletter. It's you and not you and summer tomatoes are the only thing keeping my mind straight. And we're all here. Oh, and look, people are commenting. It's all working, guys.
Good.
They're very excited. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for having us.
We could read.
It was an assumption I made, and hopefully it's the correct one. Honestly, you could have not read this book, and I believe you could make me believe you've read this book.
Not me.
Oh,
no.
that was an option.
Okay, let's get into it. I want to start with Janet because in your first book, look at all these books we got. You talk about Their Eyes Were Watching God as being a really seminal, important book for you, and I'm just wondering if you could talk about that.
My God, yeah. I remember it was 11th grade English class, and I just remember she brought this literal book. This is literally the book from my from 10th grade.
Is it did you write it?
It's actually not, which I'm so surprised by. But then I have my Oprah Halle Berry book, movie adaptation version, which is all marked up from college and everything. But this was the one that came to me, and I was like, oh, and I didn't even know it was a black woman, obviously, but until you read the first page, and I was like, oh, and there was just, it's hard to explain, but a seeing. I felt so seen in such a way that was I felt like she looked like me. She, felt like how I wanted to feel in the world and how I wanted to be viewed as the object of everyone's despise. But then still is choosing her own adventure. And at the end of the day, it's a simple love story. And I think the, 11th grader that I was someone that was constantly watching, my peers do very simple things, being the only Black girl and the only, Black trans girl in my high school, watching them hold hands and steal kisses and go to dances. And I wanted all of those things. And so it would make sense that I would be enraptured by this Black woman's love story, and the great love and care that she wrote Janie in, yeah. And so that kind of, and I stole from Zora Neale Hurston completely, and I could give her credit, but the format, the narrative structure of my first memoir is the present day, me coming to know this man that I was falling in love with and telling him my story in the same way that she came back from the muck and, told Phoebe her story. And so in the middle part of it is me in first person telling my story. And then I go back to it in the end. And it's that same narrative structure that I stole and that made it feel plausible for me to write a book. And so I just owe so much to Queen Zora.
I feel like anyone who knows you personally would not be surprised that this novel resonates with you.
And even more today, reading it now, I'm like, oh my God, this is wild. It's wild. It's subliminally, it's in there from decades of reading it that I'm literally living my life like Janie. It's so problematic, you guys, but we'll get into that after.
Sam, do you remember reading this book for the first time?
I did also read it in high school. I mean, I did not pay attention to a lot of things in school. I'm sure that's a shock. So Janet, I'm glad you're here to speak beautifully, because the two things I have to say about my high school reading is, one, I have a sister named Janie, and so the whole time I was just like picturing my sister as this beautiful woman, and I'm like, yeah, right. And then we read it. You know that like period of high school where you read like all the kind of like dusty books, where you read like Grapes of Wrath and all these things that take place where it's like hot and people are wearing overalls. I like grew up in the suburbs, and I was very like anti the dust. And I was like, God, I just wish that Janie could get someplace and get cleaned up. So when she married Jody, I was like, and there's still a part of me that's like this. That's like, oh man, living in the big house and working in the store would like be my thing. I didn't even care about the romance because I didn't believe that romance was like possible for me. But I did believe that I could like run a store. So that was the fantasy for me. Like out of the dust into the nice house running the store.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, and I was getting this message a lot from people as they were reading the book. A lot of us read this in high school, and I think even, depending on sort of your generation, like I believe it was like an AP English history book. So like we'd all sort of read it, and I really, I think there's a way to look at this book in just the context of like a piece of literature, just like you can analyze it that way. And I think there's something really different about, especially like this seems to be what everyone's sort of realizing, like reading it as an adult and as this woman who has been like going on this specific journey, and the way these men in her life have like, steered the direction of her life, and just her trying to be like a self-actualized person, which I think when you are 17 or 18, unless you're Miss Janet Mock, it's hard to, I think it's hard to kind of conceptualize. And I think, my guess would be if you were someone who, especially at that age, I think we all were like trying to figure ourselves out, but maybe on sort of a grander level, I see how this would resonate with you. But I think as we've all gotten, as you get older and you're living your life and you're like really trying to figure it out and you really have had experiences, I very much can relate to like the people who have talked about reading this, and it, to quote the children, like it hits different.
It completely does. And number one, can we like give so much credit to Miss Alice Walker for going out and seeking out to buy, Zora Neale Hurston a gravestone, seeking out our literary mother, so that we could all three in high school read this masterpiece. Like that gift of, I could only hope that with my legacy, that if I get invisibilized by white cis heteropatriarchy system and my work is buried somewhere and I'm buried, that some Black girl from the future is going to come and be like, I remember the rumblings of Miss Mock, and just find me. And then that way people are forced to like engage with my work. And so like, I want to acknowledge that in this space. And yeah, it hits different. It does. It hits so different. I don't think that I was reading it on all the layers that I had reread it, last night, this morning, like sitting with it and really sitting with it this time, already knowing the plot, knowing where it was going, but fully enraptured in Zora Neale Hurston's poetic language, in her audaciousness to make up some words, like, and just combine shit and then change from the first person to the third person to the, Black dialect at that time.
Yeah.
She was just so bold and so righteous in like her perspective on this story, and that like in a sentence, 20 years can pass by between Jody and Janie. Like I'm like, and then you kind of realize, oh, I didn't really need to know the 20 years. I get it. It. And like, it kind of forces you, like me, I'm like, oh wait, but how do we go from plot A to plot B, trying to like structure stuff for television or something. And it's like, oh, a simple sentence, like, or a passage of time. Like you don't have to like get all in the muck of everything for every single thing. But this time I really looked at the relationships in an interesting way. Like I was like, so Jody was kind of a low-key hotep. right? He's like, a queen sits on her throne and watches everyone. And then Tea Cake was like the best of the best of the fuck boys. Like, you know what I mean? Like always making you feel good, you know, but like you get to go on this journey with him and be like really in the muck and with the people. And for this time, I read it so much differently. In the sense of like the idea of her being isolated on that throne on that porch with Jody and just really wanting to be with the people and experience life. I read it so much differently this time than I ever did before.
So you mentioned these men and marriage. Sam, as the only married lady here, although you have you're married to a woman, so your life is better. But
facts.
As I was reading this book again, I was like, "Is marriage a prison?" Like
yes.
You know, it's like because her first relationship, you know, with Logan, like it feels like a prison. And then you have with Jody, it is sort of this castle in the sky type, you know, like this iron castle type thing. And then even with Tea Cake, she's still, you know, it's her freest relationship, but she's still like trapped in to some extent. And part of that is the time. But I was like, is marriage a prison? Sam, is it a prison?
100%. That's why you should wait as long as you can to get into it. Make sure you had all the experiences you want to selfishly experience before you jump in. I will say though that rereading it, so like reading it as a kid, I was like, yes, Tea Cake, that's the relationship I want, like the passionate, you know, fire and whatever. Reading it this time, I was like, oh, I am old because I would have just stopped at Logan. Wasn't that name the first time? I would have like 60 acres, wood. Like when she left, I was like, I wouldn't have.
Would you have done the chores though? That was the thing. He was making her do all that. Like, would you have been out there planting shit?
No, but I would have like bartered maybe for something in the bedroom to get me out of that. But the safety of the house and like the dude who went to work every day, as soon as Jody walked by in the like flashy suit, I would have been like, okay, that appeals to me because I really love a sexy, confident person. But hot, confident people are trouble. I'm sorry to the two of you, but I know you're trouble. I would have been like, maybe had an affair, but then gone back and like cut Logan's potatoes. That's how I knew. I was like, oh, I am in perimenopause when like the old fat dude with a lot of land is the one that I would pick. I'm too tired for a tumultuous relationship. Give me old dependable. That's what I call my wife, old dependable.
Old dependable.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
so basically, you would have just lived Nanny's dream. Like Nanny's dream, you would have been the good granddaughter, just living on them acres with your customized cart.
Yes.
Let me switch a little to another thing Janet said. I mean, sometimes, like, I don't know. I mean, as writers, I don't know if you guys feel this way. Sometimes I read things and I think, oh, I should stop writing because I can't do better than this. So what else do I possibly have to add to the world? Like every time she describes the sun setting or rising, I'm like, why am I even here? Like,
why?
What am I doing? Because it would not occur to me to write, like she writes it as if every single time the earth is created and the earth is ended and the earth is created and like at, you know, every time. But so there's that, but also the way that they use this Black dialect where she's essentially, you know, she's written like two different books in a lot of ways. Like I think there's a lot of people who would have obviously not done the sort of Black vernacular, but even just or only done the Black vernacular, you know what I mean? And the way that I also feel like it's a little bit like the way that people think like African-American vernacular doesn't have rules and structure. And then it's like when she's, at other points when she's writing, it's like, bitch, you thought I didn't know. It's like, it's gonna be this, but I also can, like the original code switching in this novel. But I think it was, reading that dialect to me was such a like, it was such a breath of fresh air, but also just like understanding it, which I think there are probably a lot of people who might see it and get tripped up and think, I don't know. But then it's like, as soon as you start saying it, it's like, yes, this is English. This is the world we're living.
Mm-hmm.
What I mean? Like, I understand all of this.
Yeah. And the deep love and respect that Zora Neale Hurston had for how our people speak.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's what it makes you want to take your time. You're forced to take your time in the same way with Toni Morrison's prose. You're forced to read it 4 times to actually really understand what she's trying to say. Like, it's that difficult on purpose because that is reading, right? And so I think the same thing with her choosing to write in that dialect. And to see, like, this time, I had listened to Ruby Dee's version of the audiobook. And for any person that hasn't, if you read it this way, just through text, but regardless, we should all have the Ruby Dee version because it is just so beautiful. And you can hear clearly how specific and different each Black character's voice is, even in that dialect. Like, you can see it just between Jody and Janie, how, his I gods, before everything, as he's exclamating things to her. But the language and the prose is so beautiful. And she talks about sunrise and sunset so many damn times in it. And she has new language, like the one where she's like, the world exposed itself to the sun. Like, I was like, wait, what happened? It's just the sunrise. Like, I was like, oh my God. Or even the way just how she describes, like, I was like, please let somebody describe my beauty in the way that she describes Janie's beauty when Janie walks down that street for the first time, returning on that first page, pugnacious breasts. And, what she's talking about, like, they wanted to bore holes through her shirts or whatever, and then the grapefruits in her back pockets. I'm like, oh my God, come on. Like, OG Thoughty, like, coming back in overalls, just showing us all up. It's just like, oh, you can't help but, just exclaim at her beauty and her beautiful work.
It is a love for Black people, that in that language.
Mm-hmm.
I really love the way that the metaphors that she used to describe her kind of blossoming, which I was like, oh, this is like coded horny language with like dusty bees pollinating flowers and all of that. Like, seeing that boy like walking through the pollen, I was like, oh, I can't believe we read this horny shit in high school. I was like, what a beautiful way to describe like desire. Like, all of the ways that she described desire were so beautiful to me. And that was the stuff where that gave me pause as a person who writes. I was like, oh, I don't know that I could ever like describe desire for like physical love in a way that wasn't like tongue waggling, like lewd horniness. Like, you know what I mean? Like, there is like a gift to be able to write about that kind of thing beautifully.
Just stunning. It's the most beautiful passage, I think, in the book. Is just that 16-year-old Janie laying underneath that pear tree, in her grandmother's yard.
It's what I remembered. I think like the first time that I revisited the book since high school, I kind of remembered what it was about, but I was like, oh, it's that novel about the girl under the tree, like the blooming and the bees. Like, that was like the scene that I remembered more than anything else.
Yeah.
So obviously, like, we're spanning men, we're spanning places. I think it's super interesting. Like, Zora Neale Hurston was born, I believe, in Alabama, but then grew up in Florida, which is like a state that I feel like we often forget about, just in terms of like Black people and slavery. It's like, they had slavery, guys, and there were Black people there. Again, this is going to be my plug constantly for The Warmth of Other Suns, but The Warmth of Other Suns follows a man who was from Florida and like worked on like an orange grove, and he was sort of riling up the workers, for their wages or their rights. And they were like, oh, they're going to lynch you tonight if you don't go, like, tonight. So like, get on the train now. And when I read that, I was like, oh shit, Florida. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like all of our focus is like, you know, it's like slaves in Tennessee and Alabama and shit like that. And so I think one of the things I just appreciate, and I think that happens too when you allow Black people to tell the scope of their stories, is like you get, you know what I mean? Like they take place in places you didn't think of. But specifically talking about like the Muck and Eatonville as these two kind of like havens of Blackness. And I mean, I think I'd rather live in Eatonville because I like homes. But like, I don't know, I feel like the first time I read about like a kind of Black haven, like this world that was like made up of Black people, where Black people owned the stores and and got to like be themselves and be unbothered by white people.
I just read, along with everyone else in the country, The Vanishing Half, in which there's like a city, I don't want to give anything away, but there's a city that is just for Black people. And so reading this again, I was like, oh, right, yes, what does it look like when, like, yes, of course we made towns and we had places that were for us. Because I get really kind of bristly sometimes when we think about the past in this totally beaten down way. Like when we forget that there are people who did things and made things and created lives for themselves. Like the lives they could create were not what they could be because of white supremacy, but we did create lives with what we had. And so reading this again, it was really like a beautiful reminder of our perseverance and our ability to make things for ourselves. Really reading these two like back to back, like a nice reminder of that.
The Vanishing Half is on my next to read. I can't wait. I can't wait. But you know, I'm thinking about, you know, even her choice with you know, Tea Cake to go to the glades, to be in the muck, to be amongst the people, to work, to use her hands, to joke, to all that living stuff that she got to do in a way. Like it's just, I don't know, it just hit so differently this time. And I don't know if it's because, you know, when you get like a spot of, you know, acclaim or a piece of celebrity, you realize, and I struggle with writing this in my first memoir, but there's a separation that comes with this idea of like this Black person or this marginalized person is exceptional. So we pluck them from the community in an interesting way. And I think part of my life, I feel like I lived a little bit of that, you know, Janie, you know, on the porch kind of thing, watching the world go and have these adventures. And, you know, my messy love story too. It's like, you know, I left and ran off from my last husband with, you know, someone 12 years younger. When I heard her say something like, I'm almost 12 years older than you, I was like, ah! I was like, oh my God. And, you know, our mutual friend, Andrew Morrow, he goes, I remember when I told him, like, I was like, oh, you know, I'm dating such and he's like, oh my God, welcome to the world of the living. You're messy now, you know? And there was something about like getting in the mess, being with the people, experiencing all that stuff.
Bro, you were messy here too.
Exactly. No, but I also love that she brings in Eatonville, and, you know, and there's an interesting way where it seemed like the way that she broke it down. Of course, she grew up in it, right? She spent part of her childhood growing up in Eatonville, and the only all Black incorporated town. But the way she starts it, it's basically like two Black men sitting underneath a tree doing nothing. And then Jody had to be like, come on, y'all, we need a post office. We need land. Like, what y'all niggas doing? Come on. And so it felt tangible.
Was when he rolled up and he was like, is this it? Is this all you've done? He was like, that's it.
And they were happy. They were fine. They're like, this is ours. This is what we got.
I mean, seeing like a Black town also being built the way I don't think white people were out here just like we're making the greatest city on earth. You know, some white man probably showed up and was like, okay, let's go.
Exactly.
You work for me now, build it.
But I mean, I think the other thing is like in those settings, you have this really conspicuous lack of white people, and especially in the whole novel. And I think like I've probably referenced this 100 times, but I wrote this article when I was at Jezebel talking about how I was tired of slave movies. And like at the time, a lot of people got mad at me, and I was right. But it was, you know, about the types of stories that get to be told and the types of stories that get to be considered important and good and award worthy. And so frequently it is a story that is about slavery or the civil rights movement. And I think the reason a lot of white audiences, or at least white voters, like those is because in a lot of ways it still centers whiteness. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think every story about slavery centers whiteness. I think people had lives that they were experiencing fully separate of white people and the situation that they were in. But like, it's hard to tell a story about slavery without white people because they like wouldn't fucking go away. You know, they were, it was like because of them. And so, you know, with something, I talked about that with Britt, with the vanishing half of like these stories of just like not being, even when it's not about white people, the extent to which these stories are still rooted in like a white gaze and just the context of whiteness, or you're responding to whiteness. You know, like a story about the civil rights movement, it's responding to oppression that white supremacy has put on you. And I think those stories are important, and I think they're necessary. I think that shit should be learned in school primarily. I don't think you should be learning about that in a movie, but to read things that are just like, I think the times that white people appear in this book, it's like once or twice. And in only the way that it's necessary, because that's how we move through our lives most of the time. You know, we don't live our lives always in the context of whiteness.
It was what were the moments? It basically was when they had to bury the dead.
Well, yeah, and then when they were at the house, and then at the end, like towards the end, after the hurricane, it was like white men had made them like, you know,
bury the dead,
bury the dead and the bodies and all of that. But they were like an inconvenience, with the exception of it was just like, oh, look what these white people are making us do. But I don't know, it was just a really, I think reading that book when I did, and I think it's something that like stuck with me and that I remembered even when I didn't remember that I remembered, which was just like, you know, like even just on a baseline, like a period piece with Black people, you know, and like even remembering that the Halle Berry
for ABC. You can't find it. You can't find that TV movie, and you cannot find introducing Dorothy Dandridge. You can't find either of them.
You can't find Dorothy Dandridge?
No, you can't. And they're both Halle Berry movies, so I'm wondering what happened. I don't, you know, I'm always going to conspiracy, so who knows? But what's interesting to me too is like even hearing like the one character that even speaks about white people is like the one character you really can't stand and don't like anyway.
Yeah, like Mrs. Turner. Yeah. Her ass.
And Janie's like, yeah, sure, I guess. Like not knowing at all like what she's talking about.
I did like in the beginning that the like good white lady, and I say that in scare quotes, the good white lady that Nanny works for was like nice, but she didn't throw her a parade, because often in these kind of stories, it's like, not only was this white person good, but they saved me. They did everything for me. Thank you so much. It was like, well, she gave us some clothes and she didn't beat us. That's fine. It wasn't like, oh, Mrs., thank you for being so good. It was like, she gave us some clothes and we had a little house, but that's it.
Do you think Janie can be read as, this is a loaded question because I feel like the word has gotten so diluted and used incorrectly, but do you think Janie can be read as a feminist character, or this is a feminist story?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, everything, all of the motion in the book was propelled, maybe not so much at the beginning because her grandmother made that choice for her, but propelled by her desires. Like, she did what she wanted to do, which I think is like a fundamentally feminist thing, is making the choices, especially when they're bad, making the choices that you want to make for yourself and creating the life that you want to have. And even during like the Jody years when she was kind of existing in his shadow, she still had her own thoughts and she still had her own desires. And the minute he died, she was like, well, time to go do me now. So yeah, I think she's a feminist.
Yeah, I've always read it, at least since college, since my readings. I've always read it even clearer and clearer about, you know, just the fact that it's a Black woman writing about a Black woman's life journey through these relationships. And, you know, some people, I can assume there must be a lot of criticism about the sense of like her entire journey has been about seeking relationships with men. But I think that particularly at this time, you know, when Zora was writing this, I have to assume that just a Black woman writing about love, and maybe not, and she was criticized about this, about it not being more political, not being more social, having all of these things. But I think it stood the test of time, and it has affected so many Black women specifically on a deep level, because it centers her own teenage longing to be in marriage, and then to realize, to unpack that, oh wait, marriage and love are not the same things, and marriage and love and sex are not the same things. And then the world's expectations being thrust on her at every single part of her life. And then her also being clear, and I read it this time even more distinctly, that Janie being conscious about what parts of herself during her marriage, specifically with Jody, that she turned off and said, I will not allow the world to engage that deep part of my sense. So I'm going to store that away, and I'm going to work in the store, and I'm going to wrap up my hair, and I'm going to do all of these things. And as soon as he's gone, the performance of grief, right? My husband is gone. But not until after she looked at herself in the mirror, and she, you know, she looked at herself again, and she saw herself in self-reflection, and like all these things that are just like these little bitty turns and moments that she puts in that are so big. They're so little because they're about one person, but isn't that the point, right? Our choices, our decisions, in the face of a society and a culture and a people in their neighborhood that are constantly telling us what we ought to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, that one of the last normal events I went to was a baby shower of a friend, and she had the baby, and then I got a thank you card for the gift that I'd given her, and I'd also given her this book, and she wrote me this really very sweet thank you letter, and she was talking about how she had never thought of feminism and the concept of motherhood, and how she always thought of it only in the concept of like work and rising to the top, and you know, and being like the boss bitch in charge kind of a thing. And I think the idea that like, first of all, like that's not necessarily something that all women want. And not even, you know, not to limit this at all to motherhood, but like in the book with something like love, like the way that you love someone or in relationships, that like those can be feminist choices. I thought was really interesting, and I really appreciated the way that she talked about how this experience had made her realize that like there's lots of ways she moves through her life that are influenced by her feminism, and you know, and that sort of outlook and those decisions that she's making. And yeah, I mean, I think it is easy to read this as, you know, I think if I had been like 15 or something, you're like, okay, so this bitch had 3 men and they were all, you know, you were like, like whatever. But also recognizing that like, okay, where are we at the time period? Like what things were available to her. And so making the decision to leave, you know, she didn't leave Jody, but she sure did like not soon after pack up and go, you know, like as that being like a choice that she could make at that time is like a really like one of fewer choices than we have the ability to make, but being like a really significant choice, and especially about her own autonomy as a human being.
I thought it was incredible. This is a quick dumb thing, but I thought it was incredible, especially at the time that the book was written, in her first marriage, for Janie to acknowledge that she didn't love him and that she had this sort of fallacy that love would grow just from the fact of being married, and that you could acknowledge that it hadn't. Like, reading that again, and like, I was like, when was this published? Because that's like a revolutionary thing to say, especially as a woman, and to say to other women who are reading your book, because it's like, you know, we're all like fed the lie that like marriage solves everything. But to acknowledge that, like, yeah, I don't love this person, but I hope it'll grow after being around him. And then she's in the marriage and she's like, you know what? It didn't grow. And then like acknowledging that and then leaving, I thought was like, you know, we use the word revolutionary too often, but it is for the time like revolutionary.
Yeah. And then also, you know, going back to your question, Kara, about is it feminist? You know, through a white woman's lens, it's not. I can hear the think pieces about it over and over, but think about how this little girl was raised by someone who came out of slavery, who was freed from slavery, right? Nanny having no choices. And even when she's telling her life story to her best friend, she starts it from the very beginning, and her becoming, with her mother being raped by the teacher and her grandmother being raped, you know, and then penalized by the woman of the house, right? That all of that lineage of how Black women were stripped of choice and agency and the rights to do what they want with their bodies. And then you have this young girl coming out of that and saying, but I want love, and like I want that feeling, and I want this thing. And then when she flings off her apron and runs, you know, with Jody, you're just like, yes! Like, you can't help but scream. Yeah. And like, you know, the young
do it the first time.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, she really lived with that man.
She said bye. Like, I don't even know, what did a divorce look like? I guess the laws were just all over the place. I guess she just said, I'm divorced. That's it. I'm done. But like those choices and those, you know, and then knowing that she's choosing to tell her story with that lineage and starting from her grandmother to her mother to herself, and seeing how, and it's a story about womanhood, specifically being a Black woman in the late 20s, early 30s, America. So
I think maybe it's because I have also The Vanishing Half still on the brain, but reading it again and all of the references to like her hair and clearly her being, I mean, one of the things that I appreciate about like the story of who Janie is I don't have the facts on this, but I bet you up until recently, like the last few decades, the majority of so-called mixed people were the result of white men raping Black women. Like if you're just talking about Black people. Like it was not that long, you know, whenever, you know, the Loving case was like the way that we, you know, like these people that came out, like lighter skinned Black people, all of that, like that was the result of a white man raping a Black woman, like for all of slavery. Like that's why we all look the way that we do. And so I thought in looking back at that, like the sort of the fact of her existence, and then also remembering that for Black people, that wasn't, like she mentions her hair a lot, and I think presumably the way that modern day we would read it, she was like light-skinned, but like she was very much just a Black woman, and that meant nothing, you know, in that context. And I think it's sort of like when people talk about like house slaves, and it's like, but you were still a slave. Like that wasn't like the idea of that being better somehow. Like I thought it was both interesting, like picturing her, and I think I was probably picturing Halle Berry too from like the movie, but also just like this, again, like this spectrum of Blackness, and it not being any more or less Black to us.
But then also that hair was a signifier of so much, right? Like it's like, it's a signifier of her own freedom, right? It's, you know, you tie it up because I saw some man brushing up against it at the edges of your braid. So like her husband makes her tie it up in a handkerchief and she holds it there forever, you know, and thinking about, I even thought about this small like character, and I was telling my friend Angelica about this. I was like, you just need to only wear white, exclusively wear white, because there's Daisy, that character. I was like, I could have had a whole nother book on Daisy. I was like, what is Daisy up to? Like, what is she doing? Her and her girls, like as soon as she came by, they all stood on the side of her, and Daisy was like in her white with her hat tilted. I was like, who's Daisy? But like, you know, thinking about how, you know, and I think in grad school, and then NYU, I wrote an essay, because in this version, I have literally hair. Every part of hair is like underlined and like written, and it's like hair. This whole thing about the symbolism of the hair and what it meant. And I remember fighting with my professor, and he was like, oh, I don't know if that's like a strong, you know, I don't know if that's like a strong argument that it's a signifier of her freedom and her beauty. And I was like, yeah, but it's also everything and nothing too. Like to her, it's nothing, but it also is everything, because Black women's hair and, you know, what all the meanings and about the way we wear it and how we're policed because of it and how we're contained and not being given things because of how it looks or doesn't look, you know, all the laws on the books about how we have to wear it in the workplace, blah, blah, blah. But yeah, I don't think and that's why I think I have such a celebration with Janie on the muck and going and working with the people, because despite the color of her skin and the texture of her hair and its length and all this stuff, the class she comes from, that she still chooses and finds her greatest, to me at least when I read it, her greatest freedom is being amongst the people beside her beloved and just living life and picking beans.
I thought it was interesting that when she wrote about, because I didn't really get a sense of what Janie looked like until contrasted with Daisy, and the way she writes about Daisy's hair and its thickness, and then contrast that with Janie's hair and how it's like super long, and the fact that they're probably around the same age, but there's a whole thing about how Daisy is single and the men love to flirt with her, but none of them have made her a wife. Meanwhile, someone's always trying to be Janie's husband. I thought that was like a subtle, you know, like dig at what colorism is like too. Like this, yes, the story is about a presumably light-skinned Black woman with long hair, but there's also these other women in this town who are not getting this attention, and maybe that's why. I really love that too.
And her obliviousness to it is really interesting. Like that she doesn't seem, like for whatever reason, like I think after Jody died, she's like, okay, all these men are after me because I'm rich now and they want my money. But she, at every turn, seems somewhat oblivious to the fact that clearly she's a baddie and you know, like doesn't seem to be aware why
you know,
drawn to her.
On this reading of it, I was like, I don't think Janie's that smart. Sometimes like I'm like, because she always talks about how I don't read books and like all these things. I'm just like, I was thinking, because like even when she was talking about how she saw a picture of herself for the first time, wasn't until she's 6 that she realized, was like, who's that colored girl in there? Yeah. And I was just like, interesting. I was like, I guess they wouldn't have many mirrors when growing up and all this stuff. But I was just like, there are certain things where I was like, huh, you know, she's simple. She's a simple gal.
You know, simple. I like one of, you know, it happens throughout the book, but like reading about Black people playing the dozens to me was like one of the most enjoyable, you know, like it, again, it's like that's the type of stuff that Black people write about when they're not having to describe the horrors of slavery. You know what I mean? It's about everybody just like talking shit all day. No matter where they're in the muck, they're talking shit. They're in Edenville, they're talking shit. Everywhere they go, that's what they're doing.
I would have spent all day on that porch talking shit. Like it was my job. Where's Sam? At the store. That's where I would have been.
I know, and the great joy of it all, and you know, them being named after their favorite things, and you know, yeah, it just the joy and the slice of life, you know. And I think that's why that passage when Daisy comes around, it's just because you see how the men are performing for her and all the things that they're doing and things that they promise her, and she's fully in on it all, and she bats her lashes and she's just like listening, you know, and then tilts her hat in her head, and just like all of it is just like the performance that we do for one another just was so great.
I think like more globally, I think people are starting to understand this a little bit, just because it's like the world is terrible and you're realizing that even within that you can find pockets of something. And then I think you have to expand that to like the history of Black people in this country, where it's like that was most of our time here was awful, awful, unbelievable terribleness. But within that, we still found love, and we talk shit, we found jokes, we found all those things. Like, I just find that to be it's like a miracle. Like, it's unbelievable that we have the history of that, and that at every turn we're able to find that is like maybe my favorite thing about being Black.
Yeah. Yeah.
No, I have one last dumb question.
Oh, good. My favorite.
And then I will take questions from our audience, who have all been very chatty, and I appreciate it. And I can see you all. My mom also popped in and was like, "This is Kara's mom," which is a real.
Hi, Mom.
So I'll keep it. I'll tone it down. Screw, marry, kill. Logan, Jody, tea cake.
Oh, okay.
Well, we all know we kill Logan. Like, that's well, no, maybe not. Maybe not. Stay.
She already said it.
I know. Okay, I was about to say kill Jody, marry Logan, screw people.
Oh my god. Oh my god. See, it's so hard. Yeah, I would definitely kill Logan.
Oh, my poor husband.
But I think I would screw tea cake and marry Jody still. Like, the adult in me now, it's like I would want the stability of Jody.
No, that's true. Jody has that nice house, but he's such an asshole.
Here's the thing about Jody. Jody died young enough that you could take his money and go live your life. Because you can marry tea cake, but he is not bringing a lot to the pot.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Money when he took that $20 or whatever,
200,
yeah, and was like, I want it back.
That's $2,000.
I know, and he was like, I knew I would win it back. I was like, ooh, like that would be like if Janet called and was like, he took the money, but he's gonna win it back. We would have to all gather and be like, Janet, no.
Yeah, we're coming over. We're going to find him.
Because TK took your money.
Yeah. I think we all agree that you can't be with TK, but you could have fun with him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good. And then depending on what you want out of life, it's a Jody or Logan marriage.
Wait, what about you, Kara? You didn't say yours.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm the same as you, Janet. I feel like it's screw TK, kill Logan, marry Jody. He did set her up. Listen, Jody set her up nicely.
No,
because, kind of a dick about it, but
yeah.
What are you gonna do?
Yeah, it's interesting that she didn't have kids. Right, that was just something that was so interesting, and I know that there was a little mention in when Jody was getting a little crazy with the witch doctor or whatever he was engaging in, the voodoo or whatnot, and saying something about the reason why he's fixed was because of her, like she fixed him or something. There was just like a little line, and I was like, oh, okay, so that would explain why she didn't have any kids, or
I mean, I love that she didn't have kids, because then every decision she made is just her own. And I feel like so frequently you have stories of women who are making decisions because of their families or their husbands, and that makes a lot of sense. But to see what she would do when it's just her, when she's the only person to worry about, I think is like not often that you see that. And just, I don't know, in some ways they're more interesting decisions because I think obviously, like if you had a family, you would just be like, I'm not going to this muck where I'm going to get swept away in a hurricane. Like I'm obviously going to stay here. And in some ways that the decisions are a bit clearer, like they're a bit more obvious than they are when it's just like what's, you know, in your spirit.
See, also Jody, if that car of, you know, Indians were passing by the Seminoles and they were like, get in the car, Jody would be like, okay, let's get in the car.
When they didn't get in the car, I know. Every time I'm like,
get the fucking car.
These are Native Americans who know that have been here longer than everybody else. They know if there's a hurricane coming every time. I know. Honestly, Logan probably would have gotten the car too.
Yeah.
Dies of mad dog disease / rabies. Goes in like both her men got senile in the end and blamed her for their downfall. It's like, what a fucking tragedy. Oh my God, I was bawling this morning. Oh.
Guys, I want to take some questions from our viewers who I really appreciate. So you guys, someone said tea cake, but no respect on the Seminoles' names. Okay, can we talk about Janie killing tea cake? Like, despite it all, she didn't seem that broken up about it after the fact, which I think her killing tea cake is a. I mean, what I thought was interesting in rereading that was like there was the physical danger that she was facing, but also he was just like saying terrible things to her and like, listen, man, like
yeah,
she because of that, but
die when they are mean to you.
Yeah.
Doesn't that make it feminist too? No kids killing a man.
Yes.
This is the feminist hero we all need.
I also, she was also so, like both of them died. I mean, like Tea Cake, listen, he didn't like try to get bit by the dog, but he, you know, he gotten some medical attention sooner. But I feel like both of those dudes were like suffering a little bit unnecessarily because they like didn't want her help and whatever. Like, well, shit, then you're gonna die.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like that's where I started crying this morning was the part after he died. Like the paragraph after the shot is like, she's like, I have to read Zora's words because she's just, we have to. Like it was the meanest moment of eternity. A minute before she was just a scared human being fighting for its life. Now she was sacrificing, she was her sacrificing self with Tea Cake's head in her lap. She had wanted him to live so much and he was dead. No hour is ever eternity, but it has its right to weep. Janie held his head tightly to her breast and wept and thanked him wordlessly for giving her the chance for loving service. I was a mess. I don't know about you guys, but I was a mess. I was going through it. I was just like, you know, you found your person, you know, and then in his coming to defend you through the mad dog,
right?
He gets bit, and then of course he's a man and doesn't want to listen to doctors and all this stuff. But
well, let me undercut that a little bit because we have a lot of people asking about the jealousy that goes. They talk about the jealousy and Tea Cake and Janie's relationship, and also when Tea Cake beat her to just prove that he could, basically.
I mean, that was hard for me because she seemed like she wouldn't stand for that. And so I was super conflicted and I was like, I don't know, is this evidence that like real love makes you lose your mind a little bit? Like, you know.
But also what better did she learn, right? Her grandmother struck her. Slapped her across her face. That was one of the first scenes that we got, right? And so in this tradition of her trying to learn what love is, trying to learn about what it means to be love and the act of love. Right? Her second husband hit her. I don't think Logan hit her. I don't think he did. Right? He didn't hit her.
Logan was a little lazy. Logan didn't seem like he wanted to do a whole lot. Logan was like, let me like grow these potatoes or whatever. Mm-hmm. Like Logan wasn't doing a lot.
But I feel like there is that conflation of herself of like the act of to be loved is to be struck, to want, and yeah, for both of them, what was interesting for both of them, it was a performance for both of her husbands. For Jody and Tea Cake, it was about what it stood for the men watching, right? The fact that her face could bruise, that you could see where you slapped her. She didn't put up a fight. She performed the perfect kind of womanhood, which we equate to white womanhood, right? You don't defend yourself. You don't fight back. Because the men in the muck talked about how their wives would beat their asses for months on end if they try to hit them, right? And you see that interesting phrase of but the framing of Janie in that sense, in those world of like Black masculinity, how they saw her. And she was set apart from the other women in that way.
Also, her regard for men is in general so low that in some ways it feel like I feel like there was a line about just like not really caring about what, like, as a group, like what they think and all of that. And so I wonder if some of it too is just this, like, this is the way they are. Like, this is, like, not they can't help themselves, but like, this is a defect in this group of people. And it's like, that's what it is. And her opinion sort of them on like a global level is already just like, they're only going to be so good. So then the fact that he would beat her is not surprising because her opinion of them is, you know what I mean? It's just like, that's what they do. Which I think is understandable too, if you consider sort of the time period we're in. And I also think it's something that unfortunately it's sort of like the boys will be boys thing. It's like the way that we forgive violence in men in some ways, just because it's like, well, they were drunk at a bar. And it's like, no, hitting people is weird and crazy and you should probably not do that. Like, it's not a matter of,
Yeah.
But that's kind of to answer, this question. That's kind of how I read it. What is this? Can we talk about, with colorism, can we talk about how Tea Cake is dark-skinned in the book and light-skinned in the movie?
That's why that movie is, you just can't. Like, it's just, Michael Ealy should not have been playing him. Should have been played by like an Idris or, yeah, it's just so clear as to what it should have been. But yeah, that's the thing, right? You can't have the good character that saves the day be the dark-skinned Black man. Like, it's just the way that Hollywood works.
Right? You can't watch any adaptation of any classic work because it'll hurt your feelings. They're never going to get it right. I could never watch the movie because I was like, I love Hallie, but I couldn't do it.
I thought of like a Denzel. I was like, who's like too charming for their own good, and would ruin your life.
I would let Denzel ruin my life today.
Would you let Judge Mathis ruin your life?
Yes. Look, we don't need to get into a therapy session with older men. Call me, Greg.
Somebody said Denzel is too tall.
Is he?
Trevante Rhodes, yeah. If they were doing
Trevante, yeah.
Listen, yeah.
Someone's talking about Yaya. I love that this is just turned into these women casting this movie. So like, Alana says Denzel in his 60s could still ruin my life. So there you go, Sam.
Yeah. Yeah, I like my meat seasoned.
Okay, we're nearing the end here. Do you have any like parting thoughts on the novel and what it means to you, and I don't know, something you've taken from it in this reread?
I think it's so beautifully written, and her descriptions of place are incredible. Her metaphors are beautiful, but at rereading it at my current age, it was so nice. I definitely wouldn't have picked up on this in high school, but to read a book about a woman who is living her own life, like living the life she chose, is so important. So if you happen to be watching this and you haven't read the book, read the book. It's incredible. And even if you read it a long time ago, reread it, because I think you're going to get new things out of it.
On my reading on this one, I talked a little bit about the ultimate dream of being with the people, of experiencing living life. That really struck me. I think, I have so much love for Zora because of this book. I think now, just kind of knowing, the context of her life and where she was, I think she said she wrote it, I want to say in 2 weeks or something, she wrote it, and she had a young lover, and she chose not to run away with him. And I think a part of it was the imagining of what she would have done if she would have made that decision, right, to leave writing and to go off and live life with him. And as someone who has made that decision in my own life to like go off and run off with a young lover, I read the book in that interesting way, in the way of how we perform for those around us. Not so much, like she said, you shouldn't have to, look like you're mourning if you're no longer grieving, right? And how she had to fix her face to look like grief. And when she actually was grieving, the loss of her love with Tea Cake, she didn't have to perform anything. She finally knew what it meant to just be and to live and be like, bitches, this is me coming back home in my overalls. No, I don't look like I got any money. But guess what? I lived. I'm back. And I can tell you, I'm like, and then the love of it all, just being told to her best friend, someone that she could trust, like in the love of Black women. Like this whole book is about a love of Black women. And I'm just so appreciative for its existence.
I mean, we have Janet Mock starring in the upcoming adaptation of The Overwatching God, clearly.
I do want to make it so bad. I do want to make that goddamn movie so bad.
I just want to say, like, one of the goals for me with all of this is just like reading the stories that just are like stories about us and stories about, like talking about it being like a love letter to Black women and getting to talk to Black women about it. Like, these are things that I've loved so much. And I think, I just want other people to also recognize like the amount of love and appreciation we have for each other and our stories and the work that we're doing. And like, I think being able to immerse yourself in this person who is so unlike you and recognize the fullness of her life and the fullness of her experiences that are not like any experiences you've had, but being able to feel them and relate to them, I think is like the point of storytelling. And I think so frequently those aren't the stories that we're relating to and feeling. And I think remembering that like a beautiful story is a beautiful story, and you can relate to something and feel something very deeply, no matter what the story is. And I think moving forward, trying to relate and feel deeply stories very much like unlike your own. I think when they're like your own, they can be fulfilling and important in a different way. And also when they're unlike your own, like they're also fulfilling and important in a really necessary way. And I was reminded of that. And I think also aided by the fact that it's like one of the most beautifully just like wordage books ever created, that it's, you can't help but just like marvel that this exists.
Yeah, that was such a beautiful way to put it.
Oh man. Oh gosh. Say something to, that's too nice of a note.
We can't. We marvel at it. We marvel. We do. We're marveling.
Yeah, I'm grateful you put this together.
Me
I'm so
too.
excited for you. I can't wait to watch every month.
Thank you. I have a lot of people who have been asking about the book for next month, and you will find out tomorrow, guys. I will let everyone know. But thank you, Janet and Sam, so much
You are welcome.
for being here, for like having the insight that you have, and just, being my friend.
We love you. Thank you, Kara.
Reading is hard, but being your friend.
And also, guys, look at this. Just look at all the books you can read by everyone we've talked about here. It's
just a revolving.
It's just a revolving. That's what we're doing.
We're waiting for your book, Kara.
It'll be next. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.